The sun had not yet fully risen when Tom was already standing on the porch of his old wooden house. He was holding a cup of strong, hot coffee, steam rising from the brew and disappearing into the cool morning air. His gaze was fixed on the river below him, and something in his heart felt uneasy, as if before a storm. In the barn, two workers were trying to subdue a black bull that was struggling violently, stamping its hind legs and grunting as if it knew exactly what awaited it. The bull charged at the fence with all his might, trying to break the rope, so the men, who were used to hard work, had to do everything they could to keep him in place. "No smoking today," said one of the workers, leaning on the railing next to Tom. The unlit cigar in his mouth gave extra weight to his words. "Just like the old bull we sent to the slaughterhouse a few months ago." Tom nodded, not taking his nervous gaze away from the animal. In the soft morning light, the bull looked older, his black fur glistening with dew, and in his dark eyes there was something more than just animal instinct, a kind of deep, almost human understanding. "He was always a stranger," the farmer muttered, more to himself than to the worker, "since he showed up here about 7 years ago." The worker looked at the bull curiously and asked thoughtfully, "Strange or different?" Tom sighed, as if replaying unpleasant memories in his head. He arrived with 5 other bulls. They were all young and strong, but this one never mingled with the others. He always kept to himself. He hardly noticed the cows. He didn't run with the herd. He didn't go near the fence. He never acted like the others. He just watched everything around him. In the stable, Black suddenly stopped struggling. He slowly raised his head, as if trying to understand people's intentions. His gaze gave people goosebumps. So intense, so human. "I never trusted Calm," the farmer said, ending the conversation. The worker laughed, saying, "He's just different. Not like the others, that's true. But I've never seen him get aggressive for no reason." Tom didn't answer. He had just taken another sip of his coffee, which was now even more bitter from the cold seeping through the scratched ceramic cup. The next day promised to be difficult and inevitable, and it looked bloody. The sound of a car on the gravel road broke the morning silence. Both men turned to the voice at the same time. An old silver pickup truck approached the house, covered in road dust and with a visible dent in its side. When Tom recognized the car, he sighed in relief and placed his cup on the railing. "Well, look at this. My daughter has decided to come visit us." The truck stopped near the house with a sharp roar. Laura, a young woman in her early 20s, her tanned skin and dark, knotted hair hinted at life outdoors. Her sharp eyes spoke of someone who had suffered more hardship than was usual for her age. She carefully got out of the truck, holding a colorful blanket in her arms. The worker nodded in agreement. "Have you already seen the little boy today?" Tom watched silently as Laura walked around the truck and opened the back door. In her arms, she gently held a sleeping baby. 10-month-old Max, dressed in bright yellow clothes with a blue pacifier in his mouth, was wrapped tightly in a blanket. Laura walked slowly to the balcony. "My dad," she said calmly. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the clatter of the agitated bull's hooves against the ground. "I thought you were coming at the end of the month." Plans have changed, and Tom glanced at his grandson who was slowly waking up. "He's really grown up." "Yes, he's growing fast," she replied and hurried home, saying something about the milk in the fridge on the way. Just before she entered, Laura looked back at her father. Then her eyes turned to the stable, where the black bull stood as still as a rock amidst the noise and shouting. "Is he still here, on his last day?" "I've already arranged everything with the butcher. He'll come today." Laura shook her head and looked at the bull again. "Has he ever done anything to you?" Tom hesitated before answering, and when he finally spoke, his voice was trembling, filled with old pain and unexplained fear. "No, but there are some animals that don't have to do anything wrong to be dangerous. Today we'll settle this matter once and for all. The baby made a small whimper and raised his little hands in the air, and at the bottom of the cage, Black slowly raised his head and looked straight at the balcony. At Tom, at Laura, at the child, as if he understood everything that was happening, as if he was waiting for the unstoppable. The day passed slowly, like a tired animal. The winter sun gradually warmed the wooden walls of the barn, and flies swarmed around the workers' forgotten feed buckets. There was an eerie quiet inside the main house. Tom, who was usually very quiet and reserved, spent an unusual amount of time holding his grandson in his arms. Max would laugh out loud every time his grandfather pretended to be a bull, bellowing loudly and raising his hands like horns. Laura sat on the balcony and watched them in silence. Her eyes were filled with tenderness and hidden worry, as if she knew this peaceful moment would not last long. After several hours of fighting, the workers finally managed to move Black to the far corner of the stable. There, behind the high fence, in the sparse shade on the dry, cracked earth, he stood almost perfectly still. The rest of the cattle were gathered and loaded onto the waiting truck. Only Black remained standing aside, as always, separate from the others. As the evening sun painted the sky in pale, dim colors, the whole family gathered in the living room. Laughter filled the house, and even the usually sullen Tom allowed himself a genuine, unusual smile as he held his grandson in his lap. Max playfully tried to touch his grandfather's nose with his curious little fingers, while Laura recorded the moment on her old phone. It was a rare moment of simple family joy, but outside the home there was a very different atmosphere. The Black one stood alone in the box. With his bowed head and statue-like body, he looked like a living statue. The clouds of steam coming out of his nostrils alone showed that he was breathing evenly and forcefully. His large eyes were focused on the house, watching every flicker of light in the windows, every echo of a child's laughter. A cool breeze blew gently, shaking the tall trees that surrounded the farm, and there was a deep, almost tangible silence. Even the restless crickets seemed unwilling to break the eerie quiet. Night was falling slowly, and in that deceptive quiet there was something unsettling, something that seemed like a warning. When the first ray of sunlight fell on the field, the fog still lay like a white blanket over the ground. Laura was already awake, with her hair loose and cascading over her shoulders and a large laundry basket in her hands. She was busy washing clothes in a concrete sink near the house. Max was still asleep on the couch. She was quietly humming a silent tune when the silence was suddenly broken by the deep roar of an approaching engine. A cloud of dust rose over the horizon, and soon Tom, already wearing his hat, came out of the house and gave loud instructions to the men as they prepared for work. A dilapidated cattle truck stopped near the barn. 3 men in faded work clothes and heavy, dirty boots emerged from the cabin. They came to do a job they know very well: loading, transporting, slaughtering. The first group of animals was herded into the truck with loud shouts and the cutting of sticks. Black watched what was happening in silence. He didn't move and he didn't move. He just watched carefully. Suddenly the atmosphere changed. A swift shadow streaked across the sky, quick and ominous. It was an eagle. Its strong dark wings flew high above the farm until it finally landed on a dry branch of a tree not far from the main house. The predator's golden eyes calmly scanned the surroundings, like a skilled hunter carefully choosing his target. The bull immediately sensed danger and became tense. There was a low growl escaping his throat and a thick cloud of steam rising from his nostrils. The muscles beneath his black fur tensed as he took 2 cautious steps forward. His hooves sank deep into the damp earth, still damp from the night mist. There was no fear in Black's eyes, only extreme vigilance. Every part of him felt the approaching threat. The eagle sat completely still. On the other side of the yard, Tom continued to loudly direct the loading process. Animal after animal was led into the truck. Laura finished her work in the sink. She was sure Max was still asleep at home. The eagle was watching the house closely from above. From the pen, Black watched the eagle closely. Something inevitable was about to happen, and no one but the bull suspected the coming danger. The branch moved slightly under the weight of the bird. The eagle immediately prepared to swoop, its sharp eyes detecting the movement below. He tilted his head and followed every uncertain step of the small figure. It was Max who quietly slipped away from his mother's watch. Attracted by the bright morning light streaming through the window and the colorful patches in the yard, he walked out of the house on unsteady legs. His arms were dangling at his sides and his steps were unsteady. But his childish eyes lit up with joy when he saw something round and colorful on a small tree. Bright green fruit glistens in the morning light like a treasure from a fairy tale. The world around him continued at its usual pace, but from the pen, Black saw what others did not. The bull, who had been quiet and calm until now, suddenly sprang into action. His powerful hind legs hit the ground hard. With the first blow, he pierced one of the fence panels. He threw all his weight against the wall, causing the wooden structure to groan under the pressure. The workers looked at each other briefly, but then went back to work. To her, the bull's behavior was neither unusual nor disturbing. Tom raised his head and shouted angrily, "Can anyone see what this demon is doing? Hurry up and download." The bull struck again and the walls of the stable shook noticeably. "Faster!" Tom shouted louder. "Hurry before the monster escapes. Put him in the truck now or we'll chase him all over the yard." But none of the workers moved. They all felt understandable fear of the angry animal. Nobody wants to be the first to approach a 700-kilogram bull. The lions returned to the center of the stable. He took a deep breath, gathered all his strength to deliver one last strike, and threw all the power of his massive body into it. The boards cracked and bent like brittle sticks. The fence collapsed. The bull was free. Tom jumped up and shouted in panic, "Stop him! Don't let him escape!" But everyone seemed frozen. Black ran across the yard. At the entrance to the house, under the tree, sat little Max. He looked up with childish curiosity and muttered quietly to himself. For him, the world was a completely safe place where there was no danger. At that moment, the eagle spread his powerful wings. With a smooth movement, he pushed himself off the branch, raised his wings upwards, made a quick dive, and extended his sharp talons. His flight was lightning fast, perfectly precise, and almost silent. Once the predator reached the correct height, it chose its angle of attack, a fatal strike aimed at the child's unprotected head. Then came the thunderous roar of the lions, an angry scream like a clap of thunder ripped through the air. Laura, who was hanging up the freshly washed clothes, turned around in horror. When she saw the raging bull, she froze, paralyzed with fear. She wanted to scream, but it all happened too fast for her to respond. Tom stumbled to the porch and reached the old gun leaning by the door. "I knew!" he cried hard. "He's attacking the boy!" He rushed towards his grandson, ready to shoot. Laura stood frozen for a moment, unable to comprehend what was happening. Then her eyes turned to the tree and she saw her son. "The highest!" I screamed in horror, but the boy didn't hear her voice. The eagle was already getting closer and time seemed to slow down. The world held its breath in anticipation of disaster as Max innocently reached the shining object, unaware of the mortal danger above him. Then the unbelievable happened. The black color seemed to rise from the ground, a massive black shadow with burning eyes and a head bowed for effect. As the eagle extended its talons in a deadly grip, the bull threw its entire body between the predator and the child. The bird was tossed aside like a rag doll. Feathers flew through the air and scattered like holiday confetti. Max fell to the ground in fear, but he didn't cry. He just stared with wide eyes and was surprised. And above him, like a living shield, stood the lions, between the boy and the rest of the world. His massive chest heaved with exertion, and clouds of hot steam poured from his flaming nostrils. Tom stood frozen in the middle of the field, holding the rifle in his hands, as if the weight of the whole world had suddenly fallen on his shoulders. The loud pounding of his heart drowned out every other sound. He stared at the bull, The same bull that for years had been thought to embody danger, challenge, and constant threat. Laura ran and slipped on the wet grass. With a desperate cry of relief, she took Max into her arms. She cried and laughed at the same time and hugged her son to her chest. The boy stared at the huge bull with inexplicable fascination, as if he knew him somehow. It was as if he had always believed that this strange bull would protect him when the moment came. Tom slowly approached her. He carefully placed the gun on the ground and stared at Black for a long moment, for what seemed like an eternity. He saw something in the animal's eyes that shocked him to the core. It seemed like true loyalty, something he had never noticed before. "I never understood you, did I?" he whispered tiredly. "You've been waiting for the right moment to show who you really are." Black bowed his head slightly as if in agreement. Then he slowly turned around and went back to the broken pen, calmly, without any haste, as if the most important task of his life had finally been accomplished. That day, Tom canceled the last group of cattle drive. The bull remained on the farm, roaming freely across the green fields like a silent but vigilant guard. Laura often watched him from a distance, holding the growing Max in her arms. As the boy grew older, he began calling Black his big friend. When guests or neighbors asked why this powerful animal still lived on the farm, Tom always gave a simple and honest answer: "Because he once saved everything I have in this life."